is Wednesday, December 14th, getting close to Christmas and Hanukkah. Good evening, everyone. You're watching the Maryland Republican Party's Direct Line Show. Our special guest tonight is Maria Sofia. Maria Sofia, former Maryland YR Chair, former Montgomery County YR Chair, fourth Vice President of the NFRW. Take it away, guys.
Thank you very much, Maria. You know, you're one of those activists within the Republican Party that we value a lot. But one of the great challenges is when we begin to list all the titles and all of the things that you've done, it kind of goes on and on, doesn't it?
It does, but at the same time, the mission still remains the same, and that's just to continue to grow the Republican Party and to recruit more Republicans within our state to just be involved and to become active voters in the process.
And that's something that over the years in a number of capacities, you've done just an absolutely phenomenal job. But one of the projects that you've taken on within the party, and again, I think before you took on the Women's Federation hat, has been to be involved with this effort to recruit candidates to run for municipal elections. And so but even before we talk about the recruitment process, can you explain how municipalities work in Maryland, and why do some areas not have municipalities and some areas do, and what does that all mean?
Sure. So I'll just start that there's over 150 municipalities in the state of Maryland, and every single one operates slightly differently. And so that's kind of been the challenge when we work to find candidates and to understand how they all function, because they all run on these local charters. And that's kind of where it starts. And these local charters govern how these small municipalities run. Some are bigger than others. You've got big city ones, like Tacoma Park and Salisbury, that are much bigger. But then you have, smaller ones like Landover Hills in Prince George's County, or you have, Brunswick, or, various ones, or Del Mar on the Eastern Shore. So they range. And I think that the challenge with that is understanding the dynamics, because issues change and the local issues really matter. And so when we're talking with Central Committee members, or we're talking with local activists, people that have run for office before, these are all different kinds of people that we try to engage when we're trying to recruit candidates, but also understand what issues they should be running on as well.
So what are some of the issues that come up in municipalities, and kind of how do people position themselves to be relevant?
So I think a lot of it is really what you would call your brick and mortar kind of issues. I mean, in some places it's potholes, some it's trash, and actually in small municipalities it's issues like my trash needs to get taken out regularly. In some areas, it's water. Maryland has several, not only counties, but municipalities that border water. And so that's really, the Chesapeake Bay is really important. When you go out to Western Maryland, the challenge there is some of these small towns don't want to be overdeveloped. And that's another issue. So it really does depend on the geography, but also kind of the hot button issues politically or nationally as well. So when you get to those more urban areas, sometimes national politics can play a role, but usually they don't. But this is a really big breeding ground for the legislature. And I know I want to talk a little bit about that later, but a lot of the Democrats, when you talk or when you look into where what their history is, a lot of them have been in municipal office before. And when you talk about some of these family, dynamics of they have multiple members, like a father and daughter, or whatever those kind of dynamics are with their families, public service is like a family affair. And when you find that there's vacancies in the legislature, a lot of times the way people fill that, or way committees will fill that on the Democrat side, is someone who's held local office before. And I think that's something that Republicans can really learn from. Prince George's County does it, I think, more than anyone. There was a example, I always like to use the example of the Branch family. So Talmadge Branch was the majority whip in the House. Well, there was a vacancy in Prince George's County, I think a session or two ago, and his daughter filled that vacancy. Well, his daughter held local office previously before she was appointed. She was also on the Democrat Central Committee. And so that gives the Democrat bench an opportunity to get some experience and then leverage their experience when they're trying to go for these higher positions.
I mean, one way I've tried to describe it is that, of course, in large part, I live in Montgomery County, but in large part of the county, the lowest local government is the county. That said, there are also, as you've described, a whole bunch of some very small, but also some fairly good size community. I mean, cities really that are sprinkled around the county. And as I understand it, and many times what they do is take on functions from the county. So as you mentioned, trash or zoning or even police, they're handled locally at a municipality level, and basically government much closer to the people to take place there. And they get money. I mean, there's a formula. They can get a piece of the money that would otherwise go to the county income tax that goes to the municipalities, and they also I think they generally all have at least some level of property tax that goes there. So they've got money and they have responsibility for services, and yet they are kind of closer to their neighbors. I guess that's kind of a fair way to describe that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think another piece to this too is I always tell people if they ever want to run for office or they ever want to get their feet wet, running for municipal office is fantastic because honestly, the bulk of what municipalities handle are constituent kind of issues too. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk to legislators and you talk to even county council members, when people are having issues with local things, like local issues, a lot of the times the municipalities can really handle that. And if you want to get elected to higher office, making sure that you're known in your small town or your city as an elected official is really key, because if you can handle that kind of level of constituent service where you're literally having the opportunity of running into your constituent at the grocery store repeatedly, and you're able to kind of keep those relationships, it'll do you well beyond. But I think there's also a component of understanding how intergovernmental affairs works as well. To your point about those goods and services, as an elected official at the municipal level, you have an opportunity to lobby for those kinds of resources, and you can really understand what is needed in the municipality when you're in those positions. And so whether it's going to your county council or your city council, to get those resources, like if you're running for mayor or something and you need something for city council, or if you have to go hire for a county council and then maybe a legislator, depending on what that is. There's a lot of intergovernmental affairs that's involved, because when you're trying to lobby for that funding, maybe it's a grant from the legislature or a bond bill or something, you really understand how the different levels of government work as you're trying to get things accomplished for your constituents.
So, and to go back to your point of it being, how shall I say, a farm team for higher office, let me see, Mark Elrich was for many years on the Tacoma Park County Council, City Council, of course. And I think before him, Doug Duncan was on the council in Rockville and was also mayor of Rockville, and he subsequently became county executive. I know there are obviously other examples around the state where there have been sort of similar transitions that have taken place. So it is a good stepping stone. So tell me a little bit now. We probably need to explain that these tend not to be party offices, right? They tend to be nonpartisan. I don't know if any of them are.
There's a couple that are. The bulk of them are nonpartisan. The interesting thing about them is, more often than not, when certain races get light shed on them, they become political, obviously. And I think that's kind of when I co-chaired the subcommittee for the state party in 2021. As time went on, they became more political. And it became more of a movement of we need to gain ground and we need to do things. So they can get political. I think one of the big examples of that is in Frederick County, actually. So in 2021, I started seeing this shift based on the results that we were given. There was about like 5 or 6 municipalities that had races in 2021 in Frederick County, and I saw they almost unanimously went blue. And so I went to the party and I was like, hey, like this could be an indicator for whoever runs for county executive and county council. We need to keep an eye on this because Frederick seems to be getting bluer based on the municipal results that we were getting. I also used the example of how hyper partisan it got in Carroll County for Westminster. There was a couple articles that came out in the Baltimore Sun. So even though the bulk of them are nonpartisan, they can tend to get political when they get competitive.
Now, tell me if well, first of all, we'll talk a little bit before about how you recruit candidates. But so if somebody is interested in doing, what are you getting involved in running for office? What do you recommend they do?
So one of the first things I do is I ask them, obviously, what are you interested in running for? And then kind of talk with them and like, hey, like this seat could be very competitive. How much money can you fundraise? Are you just trying to get your feet wet? These are the kinds of questions that I ask them. And more often than not, if I get the question of, I've never fundraised before, I don't know about this, I then ask them like where they live. And if they live in a municipality, I then, say, hey, did you know that there's a municipal race coming up, next year, the year after, whenever it is, and then encourage them to read their like local charter. Now, obviously, I'm sure some of those charters are super long, and I've read quite many of them myself, just define filing deadlines and how that process works. And like I said, every municipality is different. Some are like 28 days before the, election date chosen by the municipality. You have to go to town hall and file this paperwork. Like some of it's like super specific. And so obviously, you want to have that conversation of, is this something you'd be interested in? And then if they say yes, and, kind of say, okay, this is where you need to go, and try to help them. It certainly is helpful when I had the committee in 2021, there was about 7 of us where we could kind of divide and conquer the areas and kind of understand the territories of where these races were. And we try to do it by region because obviously some people understand better parts of the states than other, because the state is so diverse in geography and population that we want to just make sure that someone who's kind of overseeing that area understands the dynamics of that area as well. And so when talking with these candidates or potential candidates, a lot of it is just an understanding of what they're trying to run for, and then trying to see if there's like a best fit for them, if they still want to just, if the purpose of running is to serve.
So, I mean, I assume that for somebody who's interested in, but not sure, they certainly can go to the meetings. They're regular. I mean,
Sure.
They're always open to the public.
Sure. And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that we did, last year was we were going through town minutes. We were trying to go through and see, is there someone that frequently attended meetings and was like a very vocal person, or that clearly was keeping up with the local issues? They just weren't elected. And in some cases we did have that, where we have a name, and then we try to like see if we could find their contact information and reach out to them and say like, are you interested in running for this office? And if they were, we'd be like, great, because they clearly know the issues, because they're going to town hall meetings. They understand what the council or the commissioners or whatever the position is, what's been talked about. And so they're clearly active. And so that was one of the ways we did it. But we also want to make sure that the candidates have a good feel for kind of what's going on as well, that they're not going into a position that they're running for that they have no idea what the issues are.
Right. And obviously there are going to be neighbors who are going to have questions for them, what have you. Now, you mentioned the need to fundraise, and I suppose you probably will segment the size of the jurisdictions as to kind of what the requirements are. But do you have any particular, if somebody asks you, how much is it going to cost? How do you respond to that?
So I approach it 2 ways. One, obviously, so one of the things that I do is when I keep track of municipal races, I also keep track of the population of said municipality. Mm-hmm. So I immediately know like how big that municipality is. So Mark, as you know, like I'm a numbers person. So like if the population is 20,000 people, I'm trying to estimate in my head like what the PVI looks like, and then understanding what is that turnout look like. But if there's a municipality of like a couple hundred people, I'm typically saying to them, all right, how do you want to outreach them? Theoretically, there's 3 ways you can outreach to them, because in a small race where there's a couple hundred people, digital's not really something you're going to invest in. So that's out usually. So now we're talking mail, door to door or some sort of texting.
Right.
Or if you want a cold call, I guess you could throw that one in as a fourth one. But typically we've kind of shifted into just a text message because a lot of people just don't know that these municipal races are happening. I'll give you an example. In Prince George's County, there was a runoff in Landover Hills, and the Republican won by a vote in the runoff of 7-5. So you had only 12 people turn out to vote in that race. And so you can imagine that obviously isn't a very heavy lift when you're doing outreach. One of the other things that we've done is postcards. And so we kind of talk to them and kind of understand. So, for example, Eastern Shore. If we're, helping out a candidate on the Eastern Shore, okay, texting is probably not what we're going to do. We can obviously talk to them and say, if you want to do this, but we encourage door-to-door or postcards. And that's one of the reasons and one of the things that we were able to do on the Eastern Shore last year to pick up a couple of local seats. And so just letting people know the election is happening, that we have candidates running, and just kind of directing them to said candidate. I mean, it does not have to be this super polished, sleek mailer. You can do postcards. I mean, you can keep it really low budget. We helped out in a race in Western Maryland and spent $5 on texting and won that race. So I've seen races won with $5. I've seen races won, with a couple hundred. But it really just depends on how they want to outreach, because ultimately, we can give our suggestions of, this is what we recommend or what we think you should do, but it's up to the candidate how they want to, reach their voters.
Now going back, you mentioned, I think was Landover Hills, just the turnout issues is again, in a jurisdiction of a size, do you have a sense? Are there any rules of thumb as to how many people are going to turn out? And I asked that question perhaps to help people get a sense of how many people they need to contact.
Yeah, so a lot of these races, the bulk of them, we're talking. Cambridge was the exception. Cambridge had a record number this year of turnout, where they had I want to say it was like over 500. So it was like closer to 1,000, or it was over 1,000 by the end of mail-ins and everything else. And that's another component that we can talk about. Mail-ins. Mail-ins typically aren't a thing with municipal races. There are exceptions, but a lot of it is on election day. So that's kind of what you're trying to do, is get people to that town hall to go vote. So typically in county by county, you're looking at a turnout of, in a lot of cases, a couple hundred at most. For those bigger municipalities, you're talking about probably a couple thousand. So that really kind of ranges on that population. I try to tell people, if you're running in a municipal race and it's really kind of low profile, if you get like 5% of the population to turn out, you're going to win. But if you're looking at, larger municipalities, and then particularly if the media has commented on it or written things about it, you're going to have higher turnouts. You're going to have to really pedal the pavement to get those voter contacts. But a lot of the races last year was probably under 100 votes. I mean, we're talking 20 votes to 30 votes, what's kind of that sweet spot, I would say.
So I guess it pays to have a large family, huh?
It does. I mean, in some of these Prince George's races, you get your extended family out, you're winning. Right. And I think that's something that needs to be talked about with Republicans. If we can get candidates to run in these local offices and you can get the base out to vote, we will win these seats.
I was going to ask you that. So are there ways that you can help out, or the party can help out in terms of lists and knowing who the likely voters are?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually some filters in the data center that we used in the past. I don't want to give too much away, but because the candidates in the past would be like, don't give our secrets out. But there's definitely filters and ways to target. I mean, simply reaching out to your voters that are like those fours that vote in every election. Those are typically people, if you reach out to them, they'll probably turn out for a municipal race because they're such active voters anyway. Right. And you can really zero that in by location and what that population looks like. I think it's something that's really important. And I think a lot of people don't realize in these deep blue areas, we have Republicans in elected office. In Montgomery County, I was talking to one of the Republican women last year at our convention from Montgomery, actually. I was talking to her. She didn't realize that we had 12 elected Republicans in Montgomery County. And I was like, yeah,
we
no,
won't give away any more secrets, but
no,
there's one or two where the majority are Republicans.
Yeah, and there's definitely places where we have Republicans and people just don't realize it. And I think just outreaching and trying to expand those numbers is something that we can absolutely do.
Now, speaking of Montgomery County, and I guess this applies to some of the other counties, you referenced Westminster, but also we could talk about Frederick City and Frederick County. And in Montgomery County, both Gaithersburg and Rockville are pretty good sized communities. And do you give any special efforts? Do you do any special recruiting in additional for those larger races?
I think in those races, those are great. Those are hard races to win. I'm just going to be completely honest, because the PVI, which is the partisan voter index, for those of you who don't know what PVI is. Hi, Lucy. I see you. A lot of that is hard to kind of gauge, because if you're a first time person running for office, I think it's a great kind of testing ground for your door knocking strategy, or if you want to just get to know the people, the kind of the players in the game. I think it's important. Obviously, I tell everyone, run to win. You never know what can happen, but I also try to be very realistic too. Those are like I tell people, like, those are really hard races. But if you run a very good campaign that is issue based, not party based, and you're talking about the issues that matter in that municipality, you can win, because all politics are local. And if you're running on local issues, you should be able to win, with money and outreach notwithstanding. But I think putting resources there, that also depends on the farm team. And, there has been examples of that. I mean, former YR Tommy Rodriguez won in Kensington years ago. And it can be done in Montgomery County. I've seen it done. And sometimes, and Tommy only lost his last race. When he lost, it was only by under like 50 votes. So even though he had, ended up losing after he'd won, before, it was still a narrow margin. And then, that's one of those things where you can win those kinds of seats, especially in Blue Montgomery.
Now, it obviously may be an individual strategy. Some candidates in blue areas may well decide not to, run an overtly Republican candidate. They may focus on issues that are perhaps consistent. But I assume that you encourage people to kind of adopt their strategy to the specific community that they're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, issues on the Eastern Shore are not going to be the issues of Montgomery County, and the issues of Southern Maryland are not going to be the issues of Prince George's County. Right. Even though they're so geographically they can be close, that doesn't mean the issues are the same. And understanding what those are is really crucial and important. And then ultimately, when you find really good candidates at the local level, if they can eventually run for a higher office, right, they're going to be more equipped and they're going to be more understanding of what the constituents need. And I think that's important as well.
And you talked about door knocking. And I think as I've kind of the candidates I've done, that is really a kind of dominant strategy for local elections, is going neighbor to neighbor and reaching out that way, isn't it?
Yeah, especially in those like village and ward races situation where they're much smaller. That strategy works really well because it really does come down to your neighborhoods. Like Chevy Chase breaks themselves up into several like villages, and you've got districts for some of these municipalities on the Eastern Shore. So understanding kind of those boundaries as well is important, because that will allow you to reach your constituents much more effectively.
And things like, if you talked about land use is a very important for many of those communities, but also delivering services like sanitation and I guess roads. They have responsibility for a number of roads as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you go to a lot of these municipality websites, and I've been to plenty of them doing this, a lot of that's what's on their websites is trash pickup is this day. We're fixing the pothole on, King Street next week or whatever it is. That's literally what's going on. And understanding that is important to also understanding really the powers and parameters of that municipal office.
Now, many of these municipalities have varieties of committees. They may have a zoning committee. They may have other activities. Do you look there for candidates? Do you encourage people to get involved in some of those sort of subsidiary to town council offices as well?
Yeah. And, going off of that, Mark, if you can become an expert in some of these committees and these, that really also sets you up if you want to run for a higher office, because you have an understanding of how the fiscal side of it works, or the budget works, or the land use, as you mentioned. That really kind of gives you a background and an understanding that maybe your professional career didn't give you. Because a lot of people, when they're put into committees, specifically in the legislature, they're put into a committee based on their professional experience.
Right.
And so, if they're a teacher, maybe they get put on education, health, and environment, or, if they have a finance background, they're put on the finance committee or the budget and tax. This component of when you run for municipal office and you can pick up these committees, it really does diversify your resume, if you will, as an elected official, so that you're able to tackle a much more variety of issues and stay informed from the get-go if you decide to run for higher office. So I think it's important. It's kind of like getting involved in clubs when you're in school. It gives you an opportunity to understand what's going on and to stay involved with your community.
Now, I don't know about the shore, but some of our municipalities in Montgomery County have foreign policies. Nuclear-free.
I've not seen that on the shore.
Yes, I'm sure that it's a legacy of another era, right? That some of our towns have opted to become nuclear-free zone. I'm not quite sure how that actually works in practice, but it does reflect the political diversity that we have in our state.
Sure.
That some go down that particular road.
Sure.
Now, do you have a particular? I'm not asking you to give away any secrets, but are there resources? I know question to have of somebody who hasn't had experience before, but are there other sort of training ways that you would recommend? For example, something like the Maryland Municipal League. Are there other ways that people can help prepare themselves to run effectively, in addition to the political thing that we'll talk about?
Yeah, I mean, MML is great. I've been to their summer conferences in the past, and those are really great to understanding kind of, but how to govern. But that's mostly for Maryland Municipal League, MML.
We should explain what that is, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's the Maryland Municipal League is an association that all of the local municipal elected officials are a part of. It is kind of an organization that sets up like a boot camp, if you will. And they do a summer conference every June. Which is great, but it's more geared towards people that are already elected, and they'll do a summer conference as well, or a winter conference, which will come up in January for all of the newly electeds at the local level. I think to answer the question, though, in terms of how to get involved, my first thing would be, if you live in a municipality, to go to your local town hall meeting and understand immediately what's going on. Understand what's the hot button issue right now, what's being talked about in those meetings, because a lot of times those issues, if they're not solved, can stem from a bigger issue, but also become platforms for candidates that want to run. If you go to a couple of town hall meetings and you're seeing the same issue being discussed, time and time again, that unfortunately is something that you're like, maybe we have an institutional issue here. Like, this is the same old over and again. I'm seeing that Kelly's song is Baltimore County. So Baltimore County doesn't have municipalities, but you have a county council. And so going to county council meetings is important, because you can also understand how the county functions with the county executive and how the budget works. So if you want to get involved, and particularly at a local level, I'd start going to your county council meetings and just kind of tuning in. And then if there's issues where you feel very strongly, you can testify. and kind of understand what is put forth in front of that county council or that city council or whatever it may be, depending on where you live.
So, for example, Baltimore County and obviously Baltimore City don't have local areas, but you mentioned, we've talked about Montgomery County, but I think you've also referenced both Prince George's County and the Shore. I mean, most counties do seem to have these various smaller jurisdictions.
Yeah. Well, Baltimore City in itself is a municipality,
Right.
and they'll have elections upcoming in the next couple years. But you know, I think looking at it, if you're one of those counties like Baltimore County and Howard County that don't have municipalities, taking a look at your school board and taking a look at your county council is really important.
Now, Howard is interesting, and we didn't talk about the sort of a sort of subset of, they're not technically jurisdictions, but there are foundations which are not neighborhood associations, but are, I'm thinking of Columbia and obviously in Howard County and in Montgomery County, Montgomery Village, which are sort of large nonprofit entities like neighborhood associations that have substantial sort of quasi-governmental responsibilities. A lot of the services that we think of as being government are actually provided for them. So I'm assuming while you're not necessarily focused on that, that's another avenue for people to get to meet their neighbors and get involved. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just depends. Oh, I have a question here. I could attend any. Yes, you can attend any Baltimore County Council meeting. They may go into a session, but all council meetings and municipal meetings are open because of the Open Meetings Act. Right. And so they have to be open unless they go into a closed session. So yeah, you can absolutely go to any of those. But going back to your Mark about these other, I've heard like the rumblings of them trying to incorporate Columbia, and the county executive actually has in Howard County someone who focuses on like, you know, the business side and the development side of Columbia, because it's one of the biggest ones, biggest cities. So it's kind of quasi interesting because it kind of has not representation, but like a focus on it without it being a municipality.
It's interesting. I mean, I have in the last 2 years moved after many years living in outside of municipalities within Montgomery County. So Bethesda is not, Silver Spring is not, but into a relatively small one of about 4,000. In our community, there are a handful, when I say handful, like 3 or 4 large condominium associations that are, how shall I say, in effect, feeders. They're very involved in what has become a local government of about a couple of thousand people. So you have that dynamic where you have that. And on the other hand, my apartment overlooks Somerset, which has a, how shall I say, they have their own municipal pool club, if you will. Yep. I mean, they do other services. They provide a lot of the other services, you know, garbage and roads and zoning and what have you. But they also have a local park system, if you will. So it's interesting that when you look around a lot of these smaller communities, they all have many of them have very distinctive personalities in terms of the services that they provide. Interesting question about local home improvements and I guess neighborhood improvement districts as being sort of an opportunity to get involved. I assume that some of them may get involved with more affordable housing and as part of their zoning mandate. So that may be something that some of them get involved with as well. Is that not true?
Yeah, like HOAs and things of that nature for sure. That's definitely something. If you don't live in a municipality, it's definitely something I would encourage. Because that also is important because you'll know where your money's going. If you have those HOA fees, if you're conservative and you care about where your money's going, I think that's really important to be a part of. So you know how that's all being spent and how the sausage is made, if you will.
Right. And so we've talked about some of those services, but some of them, for example, do have local communities have their own police forces, and so very much many of the criminal justice issues are front and center to what they're involved with, and they may have sharing or cooperative agreements with other police forces, but the local, county, whatever adjacent areas, but they do in fact take on sort of primary responsibility. So I think that that's probably a very sort of important one for probably not the smallest, but some of the larger and medium-sized communities as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So what do you look for in a candidate? Other than, I mean, obviously we want somebody who's interested and engaged. And are there any other things that you think would be particularly well suited to encourage somebody to wanting to run?
I think there's also an important aspect that they need to have the ability to listen. If you're running for local office, a lot of it is just listening to like the needs of your constituents. I mean, for lack of a better way of explaining it, it is kind of bottom of the totem pole in some aspects because you have elected officials above you. However, it is one of the most important because eventually if ever you go all the way up and nothing's working, they come all the way back down and you're the last one they're talking to. So I think that's really important. So the ability to listen, but also to have a good work ethic. Running for office is never for the faint of heart, no matter what office you're running for. And like I said earlier, when you run for these really, really local offices, you're going to run into your constituents a lot more. So being able to face the music and being able to have that thick skin and be able to problem solve, because if you don't solve that pothole issue, if you get a request from someone, like on a Tuesday and it's like Sunday and you're out shopping and you're running them to the grocery store, you're going to have to probably answer them. So just being able to be efficient, but also just have that compassion.
I don't want to dissuade anybody but running, but I am familiar with a Montgomery County council member who recalls getting a call about a dead raccoon in the road. And I asked him what he did, and he said, I went and got it picked. I went and personally picked it up and disposed of it.
Wow.
So I don't know. I'm not sure that we're necessarily encouraging that. That may dissuade some people from having to take on the job. But to your point, people do take, they take the constituent service component of being an official very seriously and kind of get very involved in that way and sometimes unexpected ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about some of the successes that you've had with some of the campaigns. I know I've heard a few, and you may want to share some as we kind of get towards the end of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year was super eye-opening because I got first off, I kind of made myself a little mini municipal expert for multiple reasons. Obviously because kind of looked at ourselves and we're like, who knows anything about this? And I'm like, well, I'm just going to pick this up and I'm going to learn it. And also with my job, it was also very helpful because having helped out with the census efforts, working with these municipalities already, was really important to getting the word out so people would, fill out their census forms. So that was really good. And then just kind of taking a deeper dive into them was great. So some of the successes that we had, I mean, obviously I mentioned Todd Over's runoff race, right, which was 7-5 against a Democrat. And, have a Republican now. On the shore, we had some great races. I partnered up with, a lot of different great Republicans in the party. Our first vice chair, Nicole Bennett, co-chaired the committee with me, and she reached out to now County Executive Julie Giordano, and she helped us find candidates in Del Mar and to basically clean sweep the city of Del Mar, and be able to kind of revive and put new blood in there was a great success, and I think the city of Del Mar is much better for it, because we've got really great young active leaders down there just taking Del Mar and trying to make it the very best that they can. In Chestertown, we flipped a seat with a conservative Hispanic who runs a moving company. And we had reached out, we would send a bunch of postcards out like, hey, like there's an election coming up, like just letting you know, and just like mailed a bunch of voters that we knew were strong voters and voted all the time. And so just a simple postcard on some 5x7 or like a 5x7 postcard that you can buy like, Walmart or wherever, and just kind of run it through a printer, nothing fancy, just words and saying, hey, there's an election, FYI.
Now, I
letting
recall you're referencing doing a text campaign, and I think you said
Oh
about
yes, that was in Maryland.
$5. So
Yes.
what can you possibly do for $5?
So in Western Maryland, there was a race in Kitzmiller, and we had some really great Republicans that had signed up to run, and we sent out a text to the 4-4 voters in Kitzmiller. We're just like, hey, FYI, there's an election coming up. There are these great conservatives that are running. And we texted the Republicans and that were like the 4-4 voters.
Right.
And it only cost us like $5 because it was such a small municipality. And our Republicans got across the finish line and took the majority in Kitzmiller, which was actually a Democrat municipality in Garrett County, which we were like, what? Like, we need to win everything in Garrett County. Like, what? So we just sent a text. We're like, these are our candidates, and like, we hope you support them. And they won, and they took the majority. So I always joke, I'm like, you can win a race if you really target with $5. And so that was a nice little one that we kind of took some pride in. But yeah, I think a couple others.
Forgive me, I recall there was a runoff. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, where there was a tied vote. And am I remembering that wrong?
So Landover Hills had a 5-5 runoff. And then Todd who used to hold the seat, I think he's a plumber. He ended up winning that seat with a 7-5 vote, which I mentioned earlier, in the runoff by 2 votes. So it's like
literally every vote.
Vote counts. If you need to get your spouse, your kids, your aunties, your uncles, get them all out to vote, you can win in some of these places, which is pretty amazing. I'm just trying to think now. Last year, the Republicans won 121 seats. So which I always was like, wow, in 2021, 121 races were won at the municipal level, but no one heard about it. But that's just a take. And just to give you an idea, going into next year, we have 119 Republicans up for re-election. So in the 2023 cycles. So, and lots of opportunity for Republicans to pick up, because 162 Democrats are on the ballot next year if they run for re-election.
Now that's an interesting number. So 160 to 120. Now, obviously,
162 to 119. Yep. And then there's 47 unaffiliateds or independents, or they register as other, that are up, which is also significant, because I think there is a trend of seeing some independent, unaffiliated people run for these local offices as well. So
do you have some candidates in mind that you've already recruited, or where do we stand for some of
these?
I
think I haven't really, obviously I didn't really focus yet on.
There have been some other things to focus on.
I've had a lot on my plate on that regard, but I think a lot of it, I have obviously everything all mapped out and everything. But I honestly just wanted to wait and see what the next administration is for our party, and see how they want to handle it.
I would say one of our Kelly Song has been really very helpful and says great things about David Marks, and I can't help but acknowledge that she's absolutely right. He's a great public official, and it's an interesting.
David Marks is doing a great job.
Yeah, he handles unfounded criticism very well. And isn't that a great? That really is something that for a public official is sometimes it's a learned art form, to be able to deal with people who are kind of upset, but to be able to kind of address what their concerns, hear them out, figure out maybe a way that you can help them in a positive way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I obviously wanted to wait and see, what the next administration is with the party, and how that administration wants to handle these races. But, as you know, Mark, I've been doing this for almost 10 years, and I'm just happy to help however I can. So.
Thank you. That sounds to me like the last word, but how can people get in touch with you if they've got more questions, or they want to sort of get more involved?
Sure. Obviously you can reach out to me on social media. I'm on pretty much all platforms. You can email me, which is just my first initial M and then my last name, Sofia, Sofia 9412 @gmail.com. And I'm happy to, have that conversation and and help out whatever candidates need help.
Thank you very much. It's been great as always. Have for both you and for those people listening, have a happy holiday.
Yeah, thanks, you too, Mark.
Thanks.